The sun had just risen over the Tower of London when a crowd of tourists began to gather near the ancient walls. Everyone was waiting for the changing of the guard, which has been a must-see for visitors to the British capital for hundreds of years. In the center of attention, motionless as if cast in bronze, stood a young yeoman, one of the famous beefeaters, the legendary guards of the royal treasury. Among the crowd stood a tall American, 67-year-old Jack McKenzie, a former professional boxing star from Chicago, a veteran of sports tournaments and the owner of a chain of gyms. His gray hair, neatly combed back, glistened in the sun, and his strong physique and expensive classic suit attracted the attention of passers-by. Next to him were a few elderly friends, former athletes who had flown to London from Florida to recall their youth and have fun. "Just look at this guy," Jack said loudly to his friends, pointing at the young guard. "He's just a museum piece, not a soldier. He won't last 5 minutes against a real athlete." His friends smiled approvingly, accustomed to Jack's sharp jokes, but several local Londoners standing nearby exchanged displeased glances. An elderly man with a distinct military posture, retired Major Michael Stevenson, 71, a veteran of the British Army and a participant in the Falklands War, was watching the American particularly closely. "I'm sorry, sir," he said in a steady voice, "but respect for these soldiers is not just a tradition. They have earned their place not only by their beautiful uniforms." Jack gave the veteran a mocking look. "Your army may be used to soldiers standing still, but in my day, you'd be knocked out in the first round for being so still in the ring." The tension was growing. The crowd began to instinctively create a circle around the former champion and the unmoving beefeater, who seemed to notice nothing around him, although he could see everything clearly in his peripheral vision. A local policeman saw the situation and approached, but it was too late. "Look, guys," Jack said loudly, "I'm going to show you what a real fight is." Suddenly, with an energy that seemed to have returned to him from his youth, Jack took a lightning-fast step forward and swept the hat off the guard's head with a sharp, boxing punch. The audience froze in shocked silence as they watched the red hat fall to the pavement next to the antique cannon. The soldier remained steadfast, not even flinching, although a thin line of blood appeared on his temple. Jack was about to raise his hands in triumph, but at that moment he realized that something had gone wrong. The soldier's gaze changed, and his eyes took on the steely coldness of those who have actually seen war. The veteran standing nearby spoke barely audibly. "That was your biggest mistake, boy." Before the boxer had time to realize what had happened, the soldier decisively and quickly removed his ceremonial rifle from his shoulder, throwing it to the pavement with a metallic clang that echoed between the ancient walls. The American instinctively raised his hands in defense, but the experienced soldier was already a step away, moving quickly and precisely, as if he had returned to the battles he had fought in Iraq and Afghanistan. Someone whispered from the crowd, "Oh my God." Jack was still trying to say something, but one short movement of the soldier completely knocked the ground out from under him. The next moment, the former champion was lying on his back, breathing heavily, and the guard coldly, without any emotion, pinned him to the ground with one knee. Police officers were quickly approaching the scene. The crowd began to whisper loudly, and the champion's American friends froze in shocked immobility. That was fast," someone in the crowd said. The policeman who had approached first looked at the veteran as if to ask what to do next. He just sighed and shook his head. He made a big mistake. This soldier is not a parade mannequin. He is a sergeant in an elite SAS unit. The ceremony is only part of his service. Jack, still lying on the stones of the ancient fortress, looked up at the sky, not understanding how one moment of overconfidence could cost him his reputation and possibly his freedom. The crowd gradually began to disperse when British police cars pulled up to the scene. Officers got out and quickly began to cordon off the scene. A fatal mistake had been made, and Jack was only now beginning to realize that the soldier in front of him was not just a ceremonial symbol, but a man whose experience of real war was much more terrifying than any fight in the ring. But for the war veteran Mackenzie, this was too late a revelation. A few minutes after the incident, the tower's courtyard was surrounded by police and security guards. Tourists silently retreated, giving way to officers who carefully lifted the ceremonial rifle and red guard's hat from the ground. Jack Mackenzie, 67, sat on the stone steps, hanging his head, feeling guilty rather than victorious for the first time in years. His friends stood off to the side, unsure of what to do next, exchanging worried glances. A senior police officer approached the soldier, young Corporal Thomas Wilson, who was standing upright and unmoving, although the blood had already dried on his cheek. "How do you feel, Corporal?" the officer asked, carefully examining the young soldier. "It's nothing, sir," Wilson replied calmly. "Just a scratch." Jack heard the short phrase and involuntarily shuddered. "Just a scratch," said the soldier who had just completely neutralized him, the former U.S. boxing champion. The thought was painfully embedded in his memory, awakening a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time: fear. At this time, the police officer, having watched the surveillance video, approached Jack with a serious expression on his face. "Sir, do you realize the seriousness of the situation? This is an assault on a military officer in the line of duty." Jack nodded silently. His confidence, which had had no limits until that moment, was finally shattered. Now he was facing a completely different world, a world of strict British discipline and responsibility for his every move. The veteran who had tried to warn Jack about his recklessness earlier approached from the crowd again. He addressed the police officer with the clarity of a military man. "Officer, I'm Colonel James Richardson. I served in the Falklands campaign and the Middle East. Perhaps I could have a word with Mr. Mackenzie to explain the situation in more detail?" The officer agreed and stepped aside. The veteran came closer, looking at Jack with an expression that no longer contained anger, only a calm understanding of the situation. "You made a mistake, sir," the colonel said quietly. "The man you attacked has far more experience in real combat than you can imagine. Most of the soldiers you see here have been through Afghanistan, Iraq, or places most people don't even know about. Their discipline is not a weakness. It's a way of surviving in real combat." Jack was silent. He was staring at the young soldier, who was still standing at his post as if nothing had happened. For the first time, his steady gaze inspired respect in the ex-champion, mixed with a painful realization of his own mistake. "I was wrong," Jack said quietly. "I was sure this guy was just a show." The veteran smiled a little, realizing that for a former champion to admit a mistake is a big deal. The soldiers who stand at these posts are people with extraordinary endurance. You are not the first to underestimate their strength. However, most do not cross the line that you have crossed today. The crowd was already gradually dispersing, but the attention of those who remained was completely riveted on the conversation between the veteran and the American boxer. Jack slowly got to his feet, trying to maintain his dignity. The veteran kept his eyes on him. "Your reputation in the ring deserves respect. But there are things that are not valued by sports titles or money. You just met reality, sir. A real fight has no rules. A real enemy doesn't wait for the referee to call." Jack looked into the eyes of the police officer, who was already preparing to lead him to the squad car, and realized that he was about to face not only a serious punishment, but also a test that would call into question everything he had ever considered important in his life. Meanwhile, young Corporal Thomas Wilson stood at his post. He did not pay attention to the pain from the scratch, did not react to the stares of passers-by. His mind was calm and focused, because he had long ago learned to control his emotions, a skill he had learned in a place where any mistake could cost him his life. As Jack got into the police car, he took one last look at the soldier and realized the main thing. This day had changed his perception of strength, discipline, and respect forever. And that was just the beginning. A few hours passed. A quiet, semi-dark London police office became a place for Jack to completely reassess his life. Sitting on a cold chair, he looked up at the cracked ceiling and thought about the one punch that had turned his world upside down. The championship title, prestigious fights, TV shows, autograph sessions, all of it lost its meaning in 1 second when a young soldier appeared in front of him, whose eyes reflected the ruthless reality of war. The door of the room opened quietly. Corporal Thomas Wilson entered the room, no longer wearing Beefeater's dress uniform, but a regular army uniform, a thin strip of band-aids on his face, his eyes focused and serious. Jack, who was still sitting on an uncomfortable metal chair, instantly stood up. "I asked to speak to you in person," Jack began, his voice sounding truly sincere for the first time, without bravado or arrogance. The soldier just nodded, waiting for him to continue. His posture showed a disciplined readiness, which had the deep confidence of a man who had seen real war. "I was sure that I saw only a tradition in front of me. Not a soldier, but a man in a uniform who is incapable of doing anything in a real situation. But now," he stuttered, searching for words, "now I see the truth." Jack looked out the window, overlooking the London skyline. His hands, which had once won titles with ease, were now trembling. Will you forgive me, sir? The soldier did not answer immediately. He looked at the ring veteran as if he was weighing something in his head. It's not personal, the soldier finally said calmly. I'm not offended by you. Everyone makes mistakes, but not everyone recognizes them. Jack felt much more sense in these words than he could have expected. He realized that he was not just standing in front of a military man. He was standing in front of a man who lives on the edge between life and death every day. The soldier came closer, looking directly into Jack's eyes. Your career has been impressive. You lived in a world where there are rules, judges, and referees. I've been on a path where rules don't apply and mistakes cost lives. Therefore, our discipline is not a demonstration of weakness, but a necessity. You made a mistake, but you realized it in time. Jack felt relieved. He didn't feel resentful for his defeat, but instead had a new respect, a different kind of respect for a man who had risked his life so that others could live in peace. The next day, Jack returned to the tower's courtyard, but this time accompanied by police officers who watched him closely. He approached the veteran McAllister, who was again standing nearby, as if he had been waiting for this meeting. You knew it would end up like this, didn't you? Jack asked with a slight accusation in his voice. McAllister smiled lightly. I've seen many similar situations in my life. People confuse courage with self-confidence and calmness with weakness. You are not the first to realize this too late. But it's good that you realized it at all. Jack took a deep breath and nodded. Yes, I understand. And this is the most important lesson of my life. He looked again at the young soldier who had already returned to his duties. His posture was just as impeccable, but now Jack saw him not as a statue, but as a living, real force that surpassed anything he had seen in sports. As Jack McKenzie walked back to the police car, he realized that, although he was facing a serious trial, he had become a different person. He no longer looked at the world through the eyes of a champion seeking fame and applause. He saw something much more important: the quiet strength of people who do not boast, but are willing to sacrifice everything. A few days later, on a plane to Florida, Jack felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. A message from veteran McAllister appeared on the screen. True strength needs no proof. You've learned that better than most. Jack smiled for the first time in a long time, closing his eyes gratefully. At that moment, he finally realized that his championship belts and trophies were just awards for the show. A real victory is the ability to recognize your own mistakes and become stronger than you were yesterday. The truth that changes can be painful, but it's worth realizing, even if it takes a lifetime.